3 months, every doctor. Nothing changed, not almost nothing. Nothing. Every specialist Seoul could produce, every amended protocol, every adjusted prescription. 90 days of the most credentialed failure money could assemble, and at the end of it, Mama Kang was still disappearing. Still smaller than she had been the week before. Still turning her face from the tray they brought each morning. Not with drama, not with refusal, but with the particular exhaustion of a woman who had simply stopped finding the point. Kang Jun-seo had not built 3 companies before 35 by tolerating problems he could not solve. He was a man who entered rooms with outcomes already decided, who moved through failure the way precision instruments move through resistance, not around it, through it. He did not understand what was happening to his mother because what was happening to his mother had no boardroom, no leverage point, no number that changed the other numbers. Dr. Lim's reports arrived every 2 weeks. Clean language, correct formatting, detailed accounts of what had been tried, what the body had offered in return, what the next adjustment would attempt. Jun-seo read every word. He followed every clinical thread. He understood every decision and understood, eventually, that understanding a failure completely was not the same thing as being able to stop it. His mother had stopped wanting food the way some people stop wanting things they have carried too long, not with anger, not with decision, but with the slow, barely visible release of something that had become too heavy. The congee sat cooling. The broth had no pull. She ate because Jun-seo needed her to. She stopped eating when he was not in the room to need it, and she stopped noticing the difference. 3 months. The best medicine Seoul could locate. Nothing changed. He found her paper at 3 in the morning, not looking for it. Moving through research the way desperation moves, sideways, irrational, following citations into citations, dismissing 12 papers before they finished loading. The apartment dark. 2 cold coffees on the desk. Then the paper opened and he stopped. The author held a medical degree and formal culinary training. She had published across 2 disciplines, and in this paper had brought them into collision in a way that made the long-standing separation between them look less like science and more like institutional ego. The argument was surgical. The body does not only recover through prescription, it recovers through recognition. In certain conditions, prolonged illness, sustained appetite loss, the clinical treatment achieves everything it was designed to achieve and the patient still stalls because the body has forgotten what wanting feels like. Not in any way the labs can measure. In the older, deeper way, the way that exists before language, before diagnosis, before the machinery of medicine ever arrives. The body recovers through what it remembers loving, and that memory cannot be delivered. It has to be spoken in a language the body still recognizes. He read it twice. Then the author's name. Then her clinic address, Seoul. He didn't sleep. Kwon Do-hyun was at the door at 7 with the car running, because 6 years of working for this man had given him a precise education in the specific texture of silence that meant a decision had already been made. Jun-seo handed him the printed paper without explanation. Do-hyun read the first page in the elevator and said nothing. The clinic was in Mapo-gu, clean reception area. 2 chairs, a low table, 1 plant that was genuinely being tended. Do-hyun noted this with the quiet efficiency of a man who read everything as data. Jun-seo noticed nothing in the reception area because his attention had already moved ahead of his body. Tasha came out herself, tall, dark brown skin with warm undertones. Locks pinned back with the particular ease of a woman who had made a decision about her hair the way she made decisions about everything, once correctly without revisiting it. Her white coat moved like something she had chosen rather than been issued. Her eyes found Jun-seo and assessed him in the same moment, not hostile, not warm, not performing either. She was reading him. The reading was fast and he suspected accurate. Mr. Kang. A question. He sat across from her and delivered his skepticism undisguised because he was not a man who performed positions he did not hold. He told her about 3 months. He told her about every protocol and every adjustment and every report. He put her paper on the desk between them and said, I am here because I have run out of other options. I want you to understand that I am not here because I believe this will work. Tasha looked at the paper on the desk, looked at him. She did not shift in her chair. She did not soften her face into something designed to manage his doubt. She let the silence exist as long as it needed to, and then she said, I don't need you to believe it. I need to see her. 5 words as answer. He had prepared for a defense. She had given him a direction. He told her he would send a car. She told him she would drive herself. Do Hyun watched the entire exchange from behind Jun-seo's right shoulder. In the elevator going down, he refolded the paper and put it in his interior jacket pocket. Jun-seo did not ask what he thought. There was nothing to have an opinion about yet. The observation had just started. The morning Tasha came to the Kang family home, she went first to her own kitchen. Not the Kang kitchen. Her kitchen, the one in the apartment above her clinic, with the counters that carried the specific damage of someone who had been cooking seriously for a long time. She had been standing at those counters since 5. Not cooking. Reading the ingredients the way she read everything that required a decision, without rushing, without the answer first, letting what she observed determine what she would do. She had spent the previous afternoon with Mama Kang's case files. Not Dr. Lim's reports, though she had moved through those with professional attention and then moved past them. She needed the history the reports didn't hold, the forms that asked about food preferences, family context, what meal times had meant in this household before medicine arrived and reclassified everything. The files told her what the body had been given. They said nothing about what the body had once wanted, which was the only information she needed. Doenjang from the woman in the third stall at the Mapo market, not a brand, a person, someone who had been fermenting in the same vessels for 30 years. Rice soaking since the night before. Daikon, dense and cold from the refrigerator. Dried anchovies. Kelp. Sesame oil in a dark bottle. Perilla leaves. Pork belly from the butcher who kept no storefront sign but knew Tasha by name and understood when she came in asking for something specific. Not to complicate the transaction with questions, she was not going to bring a meal that announced itself as care. That meal would be received as medicine, and Mama Kang had been receiving medicine for 90 days. She was going to bring a meal that said something the medicine had never said. I know who you were before any of this started. I am talking to her. She is still in there. She built the doenjang jjiggy from the base up, anchovies and kelp into broth the way Busan households built it, the smell that accumulated in a small apartment on a winter morning before anyone else was awake, before the day had made its first demand. She cut the daikon thick, not decorative, the pieces of something made to be eaten without performance, into the flat bag, the wrapped pot, rice sealed and still warm, perilla leaves in a container that would keep them alive. A single pan-fried mackerel, salt, heat, a touch of sesame oil, nothing more the kind of dish you did not decide to eat so much as simply find in front of you and take. The Kang family home was in Seongbukdong, the hills north of the city where Seoul's noise did not fully reach. The gate opened before she arrived at it. Jun-seo was waiting at the front door. Dark trousers. Collared shirt, first button open, not casual, not formal, the specific presentation of a man who had decided to be present without deciding what being present was going to cost him. He watched her come up the path and his arms were at his sides and his face was doing what his face apparently did, contain a great deal while admitting to none of it. On time, he said. I'm always on time. She reached the top step, level with him, bag on one shoulder, wrapped pot in both hands. She held his gaze without converting it into something more comfortable for either of them. He stepped aside. She walked in. The house had the smell of long illness, not unpleasant, just muted, the way sound becomes muted underwater. The household staff moved with the careful silence of people who had been careful and silent for months and had stopped registering it as unusual. Jun-seo led her down the hall without speaking. He stopped at his mother's door. She has good days and bad days. What is today? A pause. She dressed herself, first time in 2 weeks. Tasha heard it and added it to what she already knew. Give me 1 hour, stay out of the room, I'll find you when I'm done. He looked like a man being asked to wait outside a room in his own house. He stepped back from the door anyway. Mama Kang was at the window. She had dressed, gray cardigan, floral blouse, silver hair pinned with the deliberate care of a woman who had decided to be upright today rather than horizontal, whose body was compromising with her but whose will had not agreed to the same terms. She turned when the door opened. Her eyes, still sharp, still gathering, entirely undiminished by everything else that had diminished, moved to Tasha and held. Tasha came in without announcing herself. She set her bag by the door, kept the wrapped pot in both hands, and came to the window without going too close. The right distance. The distance of someone who had entered someone else's room and knew that fact. Kang, I'm Tasha. I know who you are. The voice was lower than its natural register. Illness had cost her volume without costing her precision. My son said someone was coming. He didn't mention food. Didn't know. Tasha looked around briefly, not intruding, just orientating. A small table, light through the window. May I sit? She sat, the pot in her lap, hands still around it, no chart, no form, nothing clinical in sight. She sat in the morning window light and looked at Mama Kang the way you look at a problem you actually want to understand. How long has it been, she said, since food smelled like something to you? The question arrived differently than questions had been arriving for 3 months. Mama Kang's hands moved in her lap. A long time. Before the illness started or after? After, at first. A glance at the window. Then I stopped tracking whether it'd smell. You stop noticing a thing when the thing stops mattering. When did it stop mattering? 3 months of clinical questions had trained Mama Kang to answer about the body as data. This question was about something else. She went quiet long enough that it was not a pause but a shift. About 6 weeks in, she said finally. Jun-seo would bring me to the table because he needed to watch me try. I would look at the plate and there was nothing behind it. No, yes, no pull. I remembered what the pull used to feel like, I just couldn't locate it. Tasha was still. She did not reach for the next question immediately. She let the answer exist then. What did you love to eat before all of this arrived? Mama Kang looked at her with the specific alertness of a woman who has been asked, after a long stretch of different kinds of questions, one that was actually about her. She talked for 40 minutes. Her mother's kitchen in Busan. A clay fermentation pot her grandmother had maintained in the courtyard, allegedly over 100 years of continuous culture before someone knocked it from a shelf, which the family had discussed with the gravity appropriate to significant losses. The smell of anchovy broth on winter mornings when the whole apartment had absorbed it before anyone woke. Pan-fried fish eaten standing at the counter in the particular silence before the day had demands. Cooking for Jun-seo before school, watching him come into the kitchen each evening before dinner to lift every lid, not hungry yet, just needing to know what was coming. The particular satisfaction of being the person who held that answer. She talked until she caught herself and noticed that Tasha had not opened a notebook, not writing any of this down. Not because I'm listening. Tasha's hands had not left the pot. It had kept some warmth. I'll write later. Right now I need to understand what your body still remembers. A pause. That's a strange way to practice medicine. Recovery is a strange thing to start at the beginning of, Tasha said. With what the patient loved. She unwrapped the pot. Set it on the small table beside the window. Lifted the lid. The smell came out the way smell moves in old houses. It didn't drift, it arrived. Found every surface. Moved into the walls. Anchovy broth and doenjang and daikon that had become soft at its edges. The smell of a kitchen in Busan on a cold morning before any illness had ever been part of the family vocabulary. It arrived in that room and found something in Mama Kang that had not been reached in 90 days of amended protocols. Mama Kang went still, not with shock, with recognition. How did you? I didn't know. Tasha opened the perilla leaves, set down the rice, then the mackerel. I made a decision based on what I know about the body's relationship with memory. I'm here to learn whether I was right. That's the whole method. She placed a spoon in Mama Kang's hand, not offered. Placed. Mama Kang looked at the bowl. The spoon was in her hand. She had looked at food for 3 months and received nothing back from the looking. She looked at this and something that had gone very quiet inside her became, for one moment, slightly less quiet, like a room where someone has opened a window that had been shut too long. One spoonful. Then another. Then she paused and looked out at the garden, and Tasha, watching from across the small table with the focused stillness of someone trained for exactly this threshold. The moment before the moment becomes something else, did not say one word. Then Mama Kang looked back at the bowl. She continued eating. Not a full meal. Not a recovery. An old woman by a window in a house that had been holding itself motionless for months, eating slowly, while something that had been absent moved toward her through a smell she had not encountered since before her husband died, before her son's fear had settled into the household like weather. The silence in that room had changed. It was no longer the silence of something waiting. It was the silence of something that had begun. Jun-seo was in the hallway when she came out, not packing. That was not a thing he did. Standing with his back flat against the wall across from his mother's door, arms crossed, jaw level, the architecture of a man in complete surface control. He straightened when the door opened. She stood in the corridor and let one thing finish in her mind before she said it. He waited. She ate, Tasha said. He went still in a way that was different from his usual stillness. His arms came down from where they had been crossed. Something in his jaw made a movement that was not quite movement but was not nothing. Much, not much. She held his gaze. Enough to begin. I'm coming back tomorrow, and the day after. Before I do, I need to explain the approach, and I need you present for the explanation, not so you can approve it, but because questions are better answered now than standing outside this door next week. He looked at her. Something behind the surface shifted. Not collapsed. Shifted. 1 degree from where it had been. You assumed I'd interfere. You've been questioning the method since you sat down in my clinic. No edge in it. Pure observation. That's not a problem. But interfering from a position of incomplete information is. I need you to understand what I'm doing and why. He led her to the sitting room at the corridor's end. Kwon Do-hyun materialized briefly in the doorway with tea no one had ordered, left it without commentary, disappeared. She told him everything. Not simplified, the full architecture. What 40 minutes of listening to his mother talk about food had shown her that 90 days of clinical reports had not contained. What the body requires that prescription cannot provide. The difference between being given the right nutrients and having your body remember what it feels like to want them. The recovery is not the same as the treatment, she said. The treatment had done what treatments do. The recovery stalled because something older than treatment had broken down, and older things require older answers. He asked 2 questions. Both were precise and clinical and built on genuine understanding of her argument's structure. She answered both without softening. The answers held then. What do you need? Not, I believe you. Not, you've convinced me. What do you need? Which, for Kang Jun-seo, was a more complete concession than either of those phrases would have been. Kitchen access. Every morning from 6:45. And I need everyone handling your mother's nutritional protocol to understand that I am not displacing Dr. Lim's treatment. I am providing what that treatment cannot. Something crossed his face when she said Dr. Lim's name. Is that going to create a problem? She asked. Doctor, Lim has precise views about where medicine ends. And I can discuss where medicine ends. Even tone. No concession in it. That conversation lives between him and me. It does not live between his views and your mother getting better. He looked at her for a moment that was just long enough to be a look and not just a glance. Kitchen access, he said. From 6:45. She stood and picked up her bag. He stood too. He didn't need to. This was his house. She was the one leaving and stood anyway, and the unnecessary gesture existed in the air between them for a second without either of them addressing it. Mr. Kang. She paused at the door. She talked for 40 minutes about food she had loved. Her mother's kitchen, cooking for you when you were young. She watched his face. When is the last time anyone asked her about that? He had no answer. She left. From the hallway, Kwon Do-hyun observed his employer stand in the sitting room for a full 30 seconds after Tasha had gone, looking at a fixed point on the wall that contained nothing. 6 years. This man had stood in rooms where the stakes were in the hundreds of millions and processed decisions in under a minute. 30 seconds looking at nothing. Do-hyun filed it. Said nothing. 3 weeks of early mornings in a house where something is changing faster than anyone is ready to say out loud. Stay with this. You need to see what it builds to. She came back the next morning. The morning after that, too. By the 5th day, the kitchen staff had stopped registering her arrival as an event. She had become a pattern, and patterns move into household rhythm the way tide moves into sand, without decision, through repetition. Her corner of the counter. Left side, window light, proximity to the gas range she had assessed on day 2 as more capable than it presented. She brought what she needed. She left the kitchen in better order than she found it. She asked for nothing, explained nothing, and produced results in Mama Kang's room that the household staff were beginning to discuss among themselves in the hour after she left. The meals evolved. She was not working from a recipe. She was working from a running record of what Mama Kang ate and how, what she said, and what she did not. The days when she left half the bowl and the days when she pushed the bowl aside, and the days when she finished without remarking on it, and the days when she finished and said something small. The rice today was, and then didn't complete the sentence because the word she wanted was one she hadn't used in a long time, and she was relearning it. On the 6th day, she finished the doenjang jjiggy completely. Set the empty bowl down with the settled, unremarkable satisfaction of someone doing a thing their body had always known how to do, which was the most significant development in 3 months. The meals were conversation, too. Not every morning. There were mornings when Mama Kang's body was heavier than her willingness to speak, when illness pressed down harder than the day before, and Tasha understood this as data and not as setback. But most mornings there was talking. Mama Kang talked about her husband, a man whose entire emotional vocabulary had lived in food. He had never returned from any trip without bringing something edible, and he had never eaten a meal prepared for him without saying something specific, something that demonstrated he had actually tasted it rather than simply consumed it. She talked about Jun-seo as a boy, who had this same quality before discipline refined it into something harder to see. It's still in him, she said. You have to know where to look, Tasha said. What does he do with it now, instead of lifting lids? Mama Kang looked at her with the precise attention of a woman who had just registered that the question was carrying freight beyond its surface. He asks questions, she said with some care. Specific ones. He wants to know what you know, what you've tested, what didn't work and why. He asked me this morning what I'd eaten for breakfast. He used to ask me that every single morning when he was 9 years old. A pause that had weight in it. He hasn't asked me that in years. She looked at Tasha. That's because of you. Tasha looked down at the bowl she was holding, picked up the teapot, refilled the cup. Jun-seo was there every morning, never inside the room, he understood, without being instructed, that the room belonged to Tasha and his mother between 6:45 and 8 o'clock, and that his presence inside it would alter both the temperature and the outcome. But he was in the house. In the corridor or the sitting room or standing at the threshold of his mother's door when Tasha came out with the empty tray. He did not invent reasons to be there. He simply was there, the way certain bodies orient toward certain things without making a plan. The questions started on the 7th day. He framed them as clinical questions, and they were clinical questions. What was the neurological basis of olfactory memory in appetite restoration? What did the research establish about recovery timelines in this specific patient profile? She answered all of them fully, without simplifying, because she had evaluated his capacity in their first meeting and had concluded he could take the complete version. His follow-up questions were consistently sharper than the initial ones, which told her something about how he processed. He needed the first pass to build architecture and the second pass to inhabit it. On the 8th day, he came to the kitchen with a paper in his hand. Not her primary paper, an earlier one, published 4 years before the paper he had found at 3 in the morning. A case study from a clinical trial involving a patient in her 70s. He asked about her afterward. Not about the methodology, about what happened to her once the clinical engagement ended. Tasha stopped what she was doing. She planted a garden, she said. He looked at her. In her apartment, she'd never grown anything. But during the recovery, she talked about her grandmother's garden in Jeju, specific herbs, specific arrangements. So afterward, she started growing them herself. A pause. She sends me photographs still. Jun-seo looked at the paper in his hand, then out the window. You stay in contact with several of them, the ones who want to. She turned back to the counter. The clinical relationship concludes, the recovery doesn't. It keeps moving in directions you couldn't have planned. He was quiet, the absorbing kind of quiet, not the thinking kind. Is that what you're anticipating here? He said. Directions you couldn't have planned. She did not look up. But something small happened at the edge of her mouth, the beginning of something she brought back before it became more than a beginning. Best outcomes usually go that way, she said. He left the kitchen without answering. The folded paper stayed on her counter, she noticed, said nothing. On the 9th morning, he found her in the corridor outside his mother's room, and the thing he said was not a question. She laughed this morning. I know, I was there. I haven't. He stopped. His jaw tightened briefly. It's been a long time. She was telling me about your father, Tasha said. He tried to make japchae every year on their anniversary. He never got the noodles right. Something crossed Jun-seo's face that his control hadn't been fast enough to intercept a flash of something warm and real and entirely his. Terrible every time, he said. She ate every bite every time. Tasha let the silence be. Every time, he said again. Quiet, not to her, to the air. She picked up the tray. She's asleep now. Good morning. She went toward the kitchen. At the far end of the corridor, Kwon Do-hyun turned a page of the document he was not reading, nodding that his employer remained in position for 22 seconds after Tasha rounded the corner. A duration that, in the context of a man who closed 9-figure negotiations without visible reaction, was its own kind of evidence. By week 2's end, the household had absorbed Tasha's presence the way households absorb necessities. not through discussion but through accommodation. Her counter corner was kept clear without instruction. The morning schedule in the household records had been revised. Dr. Tasha, kitchen 645. Room 800, not guest. Not appointment. Standing entry. Jun-seo moved his first morning call to 9 o'clock. He said nothing about it to Do-hyun. Do-hyun said nothing about it to anyone. Dr. Lim had known about Tasha since the first week. Jun-seo had told him directly, not asking, informing. An additional specialist. A different methodology, running parallel. The existing protocol would continue without modification. Dr. Lim had nodded and said the right things. Of course, if it helps the patient, that is always what matters most. He delivered these sentiments with the particular fluency of a man who had spent 3 decades saying correct things in challenging rooms. Then, that same evening, he asked Park to keep him informed. Park was 27. He had done his residency under Dr. Lim and had built his understanding of medicine around the system that had trained him, with the specific devotion of someone who had worked hard enough to earn membership and had not yet had cause to question the terms. He watched Tasha's work from the first visit with the careful attention of a junior physician monitoring a non-standard intervention. He wrote down what he saw. He sent those notes to his supervisor. He understood this as professional diligence, the documentation of potentially irregular practice, submitted to the appropriate authority for oversight. He did not ask why the appropriate authority wanted it so quickly and in such detail. The distinction between those two things, professional diligence and useful reporting, was one he would come to understand very precisely in week 3, when it was no longer possible to misread. By week 2's close, Mama Kang's weight had stopped falling. The first halt in 90 days. She was eating 3 times daily with consistency, small portions still, but consistent, which was the thing consistency had not been since the illness arrived. By week 3, she was asking for specific things. The fish again, the way it was on Wednesday. A sentence that, 6 weeks earlier, she would not have had the appetite or the language to form. Dr. Lim reviewed Park's notes every night. He read the record of the doenjang broth, the sensory first approach, the progression from a single assisted spoonful to a finished bowl to a patient who was now expressing desires rather than tolerating prescriptions. He read it all with the focused attention of a man assembling something from the pieces being brought to him. And at the end of week 2, when the pieces were sufficient, he began to build. The complaint filed with the medical board ran to 6 pages. 3 counts: insufficient peer-reviewed validation for presenting culinary training as clinical equivalent. Absence of formal physician oversight under Korean Medical Board guidelines for in-home treatment. And the 3rd count, the one built with the most deliberate care, documentation from an observing physician, showing that multiple treatment adjustments had been made without formal protocol amendment and without the documented consent of the primary physician of record. Dr. Lim was the primary physician of record. The complaint was not an accusation of harm. It didn't need to be. It needed only to force a review, to position Tasha on the institutional defensive precisely at the moment when her results were becoming irrefutable. The timing was architecture. He had designed it to land here. She still did not know. The morning Do-hyun confirmed receipt of the board notification. Tasha was in the Kang kitchen at 6:50 building a base for ganjang jejang, marinated crab. 3 days earlier, Mama Kang had mentioned in passing that her mother had made it every autumn, that the smell was distinct and impossible to replicate, that she had not thought about it in years and was surprised, now that she had, how precisely she could still locate it. Tasha had sourced the crabs from a market in Mapo-gu that morning. She was in the kitchen doing the quiet, precise work of trying to return something to a woman who did not know it was being returned. Jun-seo was in the east sitting room when Do-hyun entered and closed the door behind him. He placed the document on the desk. Jun-seo read it. Read it again. The only visible response was one tightening of the jaw that was over before it fully registered. Time filed, 7 this morning. A pause. Jun-seo said Do-hyun's name once, a single syllable, just enough to fill the space while something else resolved. Do-hyun waited. She doesn't know. Yet, he stood, faced the garden window, then, she's in the kitchen. Do-hyun's voice was level. She came in at 6:50, brought crabs from a market in Mapo-gu. Apparently your mother mentioned her mother used to prepare jejang in autumn. Jun-seo looked at the document on the desk, then at the door. tell her. Not escalate to legal. Not draft a response team. I'll tell her, him. Now, Do-hyun watched his employer leave the room and thought about the first morning 3 weeks ago, Jun-seo outside his mother's door, arms crossed, face controlled, everything underneath running at a frequency Do-hyun had only witnessed once before. 8 years ago. Different hospital corridor. The same frequency. The particular register of a man in the presence of something he loves and cannot protect through force of will alone. He had been afraid then. He had been afraid every day since. Si-yeon arrived on a Thursday in week 2. She entered the way she always entered the Kang family home. With the ease of someone the gate has never questioned. 11 years of comfortable access expressed in the way she moved from the car to the front door without hesitation or adjustment. She had known the Kang family since before Jun-seo's father died. She understood the household's architecture. She had understood, 2 weeks before she came, that the architecture had shifted. The change was in Jun-seo's responses, shorter, less frequent, present in a different way than usual. Not distracted. More focused, which was almost harder to track. She had noticed him at the Shin dinner step away twice to check his phone with the quality of attention you give a message you are waiting for rather than one that has arrived. She had checked the time when he did. 8:15 in the evening. She had made quiet inquiries through the channels available to a woman who had spent 11 years developing quiet channels near a powerful man. What she learned. A woman. A doctor who also trained as a chef. Coming every morning at 6:45. Jun-seo there every morning. She had not expected to find Tasha in the kitchen. She came through the kitchen door expecting to ask about dinner timing and found Tasha at the counter, locks loose today, apron on, hands moving with the efficiency of a surgeon in a room that was not hers but had been fully assessed and claimed. The kitchen smelled different than Si-yeon had ever known it to smell. Not catered, not arranged, made. The difference between a room where things are prepared to be served and a room where something is actually being built. Tasha looked up when the door opened. Registered her fast, complete, and her expression did not adjust. It stayed exactly where it had been. She was simply still herself. You must be Si-yeon. Not warmth assembled for a social moment. Pure recognition. Si-yeon came in. She looked at the organized counter, the broth at low heat on the back burner, the crabs that had clearly been selected rather than delivered. And you're the doctor who is also a chef. The smell moved through the kitchen like a presence. It's extraordinary in here. Ganjang jejang, Tasha said, adjusting the flame with the automatic precision of someone who had already mapped the range's specific behavior. For Mrs. Kang, not today, it needs several days. Si-yeon looked at the crabs. Fresh. Market-sourced, clearly. You came in this morning to begin something she won't eat until the end of the week. The smell has to build correctly. Si-yeon was quiet for a moment. She was processing what this demonstrated, not just the competence in it, but the particular type of attention it represented. The willingness to plan 4 days ahead for a smell rather than a nutritional target. The understanding that correct and right were not synonyms. She looked at Tasha with the specific attention of a woman who had arrived with one assessment and was already in the process of rebuilding it from better information. I wanted to introduce myself, she said. I've been part of this family's world for a long time. I know. Tasha turned back to the counter. Jun-seo mentioned you. Si-yeon absorbed this, set it aside. How long do you expect to be working with Mrs.? She's recovered. Can you be more specific? Tasha looked at her steadily. Not a challenge, just someone deciding how complete to make the answer. Longer than 3 months, because what 3 months of treatment took from her can't be returned through the same methods that failed to prevent it. Si-yeon studied her. The warmth she had carried into this kitchen, genuine in its own way, practiced because warmth is a precise instrument, was still in her face. Something behind it had rearranged. She's fortunate to have you. She's unfortunate to have needed me, Tasha said, precisely. Not unkindly. Si-yeon left the kitchen. In the hallway, she stood with the closed door between herself and the smell still reaching through it. She thought about the way Tasha had said Jun-seo's name, not as a title, not with any particular weight. Just the name. The name of someone whose name has become ordinary through daily use. She thought about the counter that had been remade. The flame adjusted without looking. The crabs sourced 4 days in advance for the correct smell, not the correct nutritional profile. The correct smell. She had come to take precise measure of the situation. She had the measure now. That evening, after the other guests had left, Si-yeon sat across from Jun-seo in the east sitting room. He had a glass of water and a document. She waited until he looked up, and then she said, with the studied ease of someone who had rehearsed the casualness, "She's quite remarkable. Your Dr. Tasha." Jun-seo looked at her. Si-yeon watched his face. She had everything she needed before he formed a single word. Two campaigns are now moving toward the same woman from opposite directions, one institutional, one personal. Neither one has announced itself yet. Keep watching. This is exactly where you find out what people are actually made of. Jun-seo told her in the kitchen. He came in at 7:15 with the particular directness of a man who has made a decision about what the next 60 seconds would contain. Not the gradual morning arrival she had come to know, no easiness, no orbit. He came in on a line. Tasha was plating. The jjajang already staged in the refrigerator. The morning meal for Mama Kang nearly assembled. Soft tofu, soy, rice, and the pan-fried mackerel again, because Mama Kang had said twice that the smell of it cooking was where her appetite began, and Tasha had noted this as information and acted on it every morning since. She finished the plate before she looked up. Then she looked. His expression was doing the thing she had learned to read, the contained but not contained register, the slight variance in how much the surface was holding. Something had happened. Something he did not want to be the one delivering. "It," she said. He placed the document on the counter. She read the header. Dr. Lim's name in the submitting physician line, the three-point structure. She moved through all 6 pages in the time it took him to cross to the window and back. Then she set it down, picked up the spatula. Her hands were steady. They were always steady. 3 counts. Yes, first 2 have manageable foundations. The third is the one he constructed. She looked at the document again without touching it. He used Park's observation notes for the consent violation argument. The notes are accurate. I did adjust the protocol 3 times without filing amendments, because filing amendments through standard channels would have required a review period I didn't have. I was in real time with a patient whose window was actively closing. She set the spatula down on the counter. He knows that's the argument. He built the count around it because it's the one that requires me to explain context rather than simply provide documentation. Jun-seo was watching her. His expression had moved into something she had not seen before, the particular focus of a man observing how someone handles pressure that is pointed at them, and revising what he thinks he knows based on what he is watching. "Are you filing a response?" "Today. I need every visit date and time I've logged here, the intake protocol documentation, and Dr. Lim's original treatment plan with every amendment included, not the current version, all of them in sequence. Do Hyun will have all of it within the hour. Then I'll write the response this afternoon." She picked up the tray. "This won't become what he needs it to become." He looked at her steadily. "You're certain?" "Documented every decision I made and every reason I made it. Dr. Lim filed this because the results were no longer dismissible and the complaint was the only remaining instrument. The third count is the one I need to address with precision, but precision is exactly what I have." She moved toward the door. "Your mother is awake and she is waiting for the smell of the mackerel." He said it before she reached the door. "You will not handle this alone." A logistical statement, not operational. 5 words carrying something underneath them that neither of them had language for yet and neither of them was going to claim yet, but she heard it, all of it, and she let it sit in the space between the counter and the doorframe for exactly as long as it needed to. "I know," she said. She took the tray down the hall. Kwon Do-hyun identified the source on a Tuesday. He had been tracking it since the complaint filed. The information in those 6 pages was too specific, too inside. Protocol adjustments observed in real time, timing details, exact sequencing of interventions, not reconstructed from outside. Someone had been present and had been transmitting. He pulled access records, cross-referenced visit logs. Narrowed by professional justification for presence near Mama Kang's room during Tasha's working hours. Park's name appeared 14 times across 3 weeks. Do-hyun did not send a message or schedule a meeting. He went to the hospital, asked Park to walk with him, and told him what he knew with the directness of someone who had already assembled the facts and was extending the courtesy of delivering them in person rather than on paper. He said, "I know about the observation notes. I know they went to Dr. Lim. I know you believed you were acting correctly." Park's face moved through denial brief, immediately abandoned because there was nothing to deny that had not already been established. Then the defense. professional responsibility, obligation to document non-standard methodology, genuine belief in the legitimacy of what he had done. Du Hyun let him finish. Then, you were not wrong that documentation is part of professional practice. You were wrong about what your documentation was being used for. Dr. Lim has filed a formal attack against a physician whose methods produced results that his methods across 3 months could not. He assembled that attack from the material you provided. That is not your fault for writing it down. It is your fault for never asking why he wanted it, when he wanted it, in that much detail. Park went quiet in the way people go quiet when a sentence has landed with no available counter. She's been improving, he said, not in defense. The words of a man doing a reckoning out loud, the specific and uncomfortable discovery that he had been present every week for work that was functioning and had been simultaneously providing the documentation to dismantle it. He had believed he was being rigorous. He was understanding now that rigor pointed in the wrong direction was not a virtue. It was a tool someone else had been using. Yes, Du Hyun said. She has. He walked back to the car and called Jun-seo. Jun-seo heard everything. Then, does Tasha know? Not yet. Tell her. Get Park to provide a counter-statement for the board, not have legal review the implications. Those were the correct operational responses. Jun-seo was aware of all of them. The first sentence out of his mouth was, I'll tell her. Du Hyun ended the call. Looked out the window at the small park adjacent to the hospital, where Park was still standing on the path, looking at the ground with the specific quality of attention you give the ground when the thing you're being honest with is yourself. The Board of Medical Review scheduled the preliminary hearing for a Friday morning. Tasha was not required to attend. Preliminary review, not formal investigation. She attended. She wore a suit that fit exactly right and made no concessions. Locks up. Her clinical documentation in one hand and her credentials folder in the other, which she had assembled and organized herself across 2 evenings, because the filing of a formal response was her work, and she did not outsource work that was hers to do. She sat in the assigned chair and waited. The board read the complaint. Read her response. Asked 2 questions focused on the procedural count, the consent and protocol amendment argument, the strongest point in Dr. Lim's construction. She answered both completely. She addressed the timeline directly. In active nutritional recovery cases, the patient window is dynamic. Formal protocol amendment through standard review channels has a built-in delay designed for stable conditions. She had been operating in unstable conditions and had documented every real-time decision with clinical reasoning, outcome tracking, and cross-reference to peer-reviewed methodology. She cited 4 papers, 2 of them hers, specifically on adaptive adjustment protocols in acute nutritional intervention. She laid the documentation on the table as she spoke. Every adjustment she had made, the specific reasoning behind it, what the outcome had been. She was midway through her second answer when the door opened. Jun-seo came in, no announcement. The chair looked up with the expression of someone whose process had been interrupted without warning. Jun-seo acknowledged the irregularity with a brief nod. He was aware, it was noted, and moved to the seat reserved for family representatives, which was technically what he was. He opened the folder he had brought. When the chair asked for the family's evidentiary statement, Jun-seo said yes and provided it. He spoke for 8 minutes without reading from the folder. Clinical language throughout. He understood that this room ran on clinical language, and he was not there to perform emotion. He was there to produce outcome. He described his mother's condition on the day Tasha arrived with the precision of a man who had read the reports closely enough to speak them. He described 3 weeks of outcomes: stabilized weight, restored appetite consistency, the progressive return of preference and expressed desire, documented, dated, clinically recorded. He described each intervention as he had directly observed it. Then he cited the paper, not her primary paper, the specific passage in Section 3, the argument about olfactory memory and appetite regulation in prolonged illness, the argument that the body recovers through recognition rather than prescription. The theoretical foundation of everything Tasha had been doing for 3 weeks in a kitchen 6 kilometers from where this room was located. He cited it from memory. Not reading. From memory. The room did not move. The chair looked at his copy of the paper, then at Jun-seo. The junior board member to the chair's left had stopped writing. Dr. Lim's institutional representative, A junior colleague who had been maintaining careful professional neutrality at the far end of the table was looking at his hands. Tasha looked at Jun-seo. He had read this paper enough times to hold its specific language in his mind, the way you hold language that has become yours, not memorized as recitation, but absorbed as understanding, taken in through repetition because the material mattered enough to revisit. Not for a board hearing. Before there was ever going to be a board hearing. He had been carrying this paper the way you carry something you are not finished understanding. She had understood that, standing in the clinic the first morning, he had read it twice before the sun came up. She had not understood, until this moment in this room, that twice was nowhere near where he had stopped. She had thought she was watching the conversion of a skeptic. The gradual, dignified retreat of doubt before evidence. That was not what she had been watching. She turned and placed both hands flat on the table. Held very still, not because she was containing her response. Because she was a person who required stillness to properly understand things, and she had just been given something that required proper understanding. The chair cleared his throat, asked if there were further statements. Jun-seo looked at the chair, then once briefly at Tasha, then back at the chair. "Patient is eating," he said. "For the first time in 3 months, that is the relevant clinical outcome. Everything else in this room is procedural." Preliminary hearing concluded 40 minutes later. The first 2 counts, insufficient to warrant investigation. The third, a 30-day monitoring period during which Tasha's ongoing methodology would be reviewed under documentation protocol. No suspension, no restriction on practice. She could continue immediately. Dr. Lim's representative was gone before the chair finished reading the determination. Tasha stood outside the building on the front steps. Pale autumn sky over Seoul, that particular gray-blue that the city wore in late November like a long coat. She stood in it and breathed. Jun-seo came out behind her. She knew his footsteps now. She did not look back. "Thank you," she said. He came to stand beside her. Not a step behind beside her. Both of them facing the same direction. "I told you what it was going to be," he said. She looked at him, the line of his profile against the sky. His expression at its normal register, which she now understood completely differently from how she had understood it on the first morning. The control was not absence, it was precision. Everything in him felt with precision articulated itself that way too. He was not closed, he was exact. "You cited Section 3 from memory," she said, a pause. "It's a good paper. You've read it more than twice." He turned and looked at her. "Many times," he said. No qualification, no deflection. Tasha held the look. Something that had existed in a professional register for 3 weeks was present now in the open air between them, visible, claimed by neither of them yet, ignored by neither of them either. "Your mother's going to want to know what happened," she said eventually. "Yes, I'm going to the house. I'll drive." She walked toward the car. He fell into step beside her, not managing her pace, not leading. Beside her, the way you walk with someone whose presence you have stopped negotiating. Do-hyun had the car waiting at the bottom of the steps. He watched them come down together. He opened the door without commentary. Mama Kang found out before they arrived. She found out through the household staff, which found out through the network that moves information through houses faster than any official channel has ever managed. By the time Do-hyun's car reached Seongbukdong, Mama Kang was in the sitting room at the end of the hall. Not her bedroom. The sitting room, the one she had not been in for 6 weeks, with a cup of tea she had made herself and an expression that had been accumulating evidence for 3 weeks and had finally arrived at its conclusion. She looked at Jun-seo when he came through the door, then at Tasha. "Is hot. Sit down." They sat. She poured. "I heard what happened," she said. "What he did was very helpful," Tasha said. Mama Kang looked at her son with the specific look that mothers develop over decades. The one that bypasses everything the face is doing and reads what the face is covering. The look he had never once in 40 years successfully redirected. "Helpful," she said. The word alone was an editorial. Jun-seo drank his tea, offered nothing. "I want to say something." She set down the teapot. She looked at Tasha with the directness of a woman who had spent 3 months in a room where people spoke carefully around her and had no remaining interest in careful speech. "I have been sick for a long time. Not only the way that shows up in reports. The longer kind, the kind where you move through your own days without tasting anything, and at some point, you stop noticing that you've stopped noticing." Tasha was still. "You came into my room and you brought something that smelled like my mother's kitchen and you sat across from me and asked what I had loved. Not what I had been given, not what the new protocol would try. She picked up her tea. What I had loved. No one had asked me that, not in a very long time. Room held its quiet. You gave me my appetite back, she said. Then she looked at Jun-seo, then back at Tasha. I hope my son has the sense to give you a reason to stay. She said it with the particular precision of a woman who had come close to disappearing and had decided in the process that she was done spacing her words to protect other people's comfort. Jun-seo looked at his tea. Tasha did not perform surprise, did not deflect into modesty. She said quietly, I have never been somewhere I didn't want to leave. Mama Kang received this, let it settle, placed it alongside everything else she had been observing. Then give him time to find the sentence, she said. He has always thought in long ones. Jun-seo made a sound that was not quite an objection. Every lid in the kitchen, Mama Kang said to him, with a tone that was not accusation but was deeply informed. Every evening before dinner, 20 years. She looked at Tasha. He still does it. The method has just changed. Tasha looked at Jun-seo. He was looking at his mother with the expression of a man whose own architecture has been described back to him with total accuracy by the person who designed it. Seon came to the house one final time on a Wednesday in the 4th week. She had the board outcome through her channels before the official notification had been issued. She had the specifics of Jun-seo's testimony. The paper, the passage, the fact that he had delivered it from memory, through people who had been in the room and understood what they had seen. She came at mid-morning, which she had timed, and was shown to the small reception room and waited less than 2 minutes before Tasha appeared in the doorway. Not Jun-seo. Tasha. Seon understood, in the space of 1 second, that this arrangement was not accidental. Tasha stood in the doorway with the ease of someone standing in a space that had made a decision about her. I came to say something, Seon said. Come in. They sat across the small table. Autumn light through the window. I told myself I went to the kitchen that Thursday to check on dinner timing, Seon said. That's not accurate. She looked at the window. I understood what I was looking at before I left. The crabs you had brought fresh from Mapo-gu for a dish she wasn't going to eat for 4 days because the smell needed time to develop. Nobody who was here for any purpose other than her would have been planning 4 days ahead for a smell. Tasha said nothing. Known Jun-seo for 11 years. Seon's voice was even, carrying something but carrying it correctly. I know how he moves when he is oriented towards something. I've been watching it for 11 years. She set down the tea she had not drunk. I want you to know that I understand the difference between the way he has moved through his life for the past 11 years and the way he has been moving for the past 3 weeks. Seon, I'm not asking for anything. It came from a place of decision, not appeal. I am not constructing a scene. I came here to say this to you directly, which I think you will understand and which I think you prefer to the alternative. Tasha held her gaze. Yes, I do. Seon stood. At the door she paused, her back to the room. Jejeng, she said. The morning I came to the kitchen, the smell of it was my grandmother's kitchen in Incheon. I haven't smelled that in 15 years. She turned slightly. I don't know how you knew. I didn't know, Tasha said. I knew what it was for someone else. I had no way of knowing what it was for you. Seon turned all the way. Something moved through her face that was not constructed, honest and unguarded and entirely itself, given room to exist for a moment before she collected herself. Then she left.